Nope. We don't need to speed up the process. We don't need to nuke this. You know why? Because this is the Non-Microwave Truth.
I am CL Whiteside, and this is brought to you by Time of Grace. This is episode number 200. 200. First thing first, if you've been messing with the podcast for a while, just drop it in the comments right now. Like, when did you start listening to it? If you've been here since day one, please let me know. I really want to say thank you. I appreciate you. Drop that in the comments, even if it was since episode number 100. If this is your first episode, you can drop that in the comments too. And I thought about this with this being the non-microwave truth. And we're going to talk a ton about delayed gratification. Our first world problem question is this. In what ways do we as people, as a culture, want instant gratification? Like in what forms? In what ways? And I thought, like, what ways do we really want things microwaved? I coach sports. I know my athletes, they want their skills that they're working on in sports to be microwave. Like, coach, I worked on it really, really hard for a week. And it's like, yeah, you're getting a little better. You're not game ready, but it's only been a week, bruh. It's only been a week. They want instant gratification. I think about sometimes when people are like, you know what, I really want to lose some weight. And then a week happens and they're like, I actually gained a pound. It's like, it's working. Just trust the process. You know, water changes. You might have been drinking more water today. You might not have been hydrated the other day. Like, stick with it. But we want instant gratification. We want instant results. I think about people with job placement or job advancement. I'm getting more responsibility, but I'm not getting that title. I'm not getting that role. Relationships. That's another one. Personal growth. I did go to my counselor. I went one time and I expect everything to be completely fixed and different and better. And it's like, probably one time. And we know so many things in life are non-microwave process and they're going to take some time. You're going to need some delayed gratification. But I want to know, please tell me, especially if you're on YouTube, drop it in the comments right now. TikTok, Instagram, my handle is ChampionLife23. On X, ChampionLife23. Ways that we really, really want instant gratification. You can share this from a personal standpoint or things that you see in our culture where it's like people want immediate results like overnight. What is it? And this is our first world problem. It is dinner time. The title of our episode is Culture Says Hustle, God Says Hold On. And when I think about our culture and how much we are enamored with microwaving things, how much we think about overnight success and positive change happening like that. And you know what? I got to have a job advancement like now. I want it to happen this week. We are very, very impatient. And I think about that from the standpoint of being a follower of Jesus, being a Christian. It's like, should we have this mentality? And in some ways, we should understand that things happen for us instantly. Like God's forgiveness, God's mercy, God's grace, being a child of God, like that's instant. Like when the thief that was on the cross, it wasn't like God said, you know what, you're going to be in paradise like in a couple years or something. No, he said, today I will see you in paradise. But there's one of those things when you compare that to like God and his earthly best blessings or God and advancement in that form or fashion or godly success from an earthly standpoint. That takes a lot of time in so many ways. And I wanted to look at some people in the Bible. I wanted to pick more prominent people that we usually love. And it's like, man, that's one of my favorite people in the Bible. But sometimes we overlook the process that they had to go through. And that process is something that us as Christians embrace it, love it, and trust it. And on this episode of Culture Says Hustle, God Says Hold On, I want you really just to think about your life and think about what are some things that you like, God, come on now. I needed this like last week or I needed this like last year. Well, it's taking you so long. Come, God, please hurry up. God, please hurry up. And just really think about, are you missing some training opportunities? Or is your focus in the wrong place where you're not growing in the way that you should be because you're so enamored by having it or that thing now that you're missing out on some blessings that God is giving you while he's saying, hold on, hold on. first person that I want to look at, because I know a lot of people love him and he's one of the favorite people in the Bible, is King David. And when you look at King David, he wasn't always a king, but we love to talk about him as a king. And I think about this especially for people that are like, man, on my job, I'm not advancing as quick as I would like. Or, you know what, success, it's not happening as fast as I want. And what's really frustrating to me is I'm getting more responsibility, but I'm not getting the job title, or I'm not getting the pay, or I'm not getting noticed like I think I should be noticed. And we look at King David, and I want to look at 1 Samuel chapter 16 when he was anointed as king. Now, this was around the age 13. Let's give or take a few years. So it could maybe have been 15 or 16 as well. It doesn't give us an exact age. But if he was anointed at that time, maybe 15 years old, 2 Samuel chapter 5 verse 4 tells us David was 30 years old when he became king, and he reigned 40 years. Verse 5 tells us at age 37, David became king over all Israel. So even at the age of 30, he wasn't ruling everything that God wanted him to rule. And it didn't happen till age 37. So that's like 20 years. So it's like, what happened between age possibly 13 and 30? So that's maybe 17, 18, 15, 16 years of him before he became king. Like, what was happening? And I just want you to think about this. Can you wait 15 years? Can you wait 16 years? Like, can you wait? Because that was like almost a quarter of his life. And let's look at the life of David, though. 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 21 tells us, what was he doing in this wait? What was he doing? How was he developing? What was his training? It says, David came to Saul and entered his service. Saul liked him very much, and David became one of his armor bearers. He also played music for him, too. He played the lyre. And you think about this. Who is Saul? Saul is the current king. Saul is the one that David is supposed to be replacing. David already knows that he's the anointed king, but yet he still entered his service and took on this position of being an armor bearer and playing music for a dude who had a tormenting soul. Like, how many of us would have been like, nah, I'm not doing that because I'm about to be king. I'm about to blow up. But in that wait, in that God saying, hold on, he was being trained. He was understanding. He was able to see. He was able to gain a different perspective by actually being in the kingdom and being of service. And service is one of those things we have to be reminding ourselves of. It's a blessing to be able to serve. God develops us so much through service. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 34, we learn that David is what? We learn that he's a shepherd. We learn about him defeating a lion and a bear. So that's a different type of battle that he had to go through right there. But that was part of getting him ready to be a great king. 1 Samuel chapter 17 also reminds us that this is when he defeated Goliath, when everybody else was scared. And he was like, no, I can do that because I have God on my side. God's on my side, so I can do it. Also, we look at it in King David's life before he's king. He was commander of the army. And when he was commander of the army, he also was spending time running for his life. And he had an opportunity to kill the person that was trying to kill him. He spared the person trying to kill him, which was Saul. And when you think about that, how amazing that is for him to trust in God's timing and do it God's way, because the person that was keeping him from being king that we would look at and say is Saul. But he realized, like, no, the person that's keeping me from being king, because it's not my time yet, is God. And that is okay. So he spent his life running and actually could have killed Saul a couple of times, but said, how could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? I'm not going to do that. I am not going to do that. So when you think about the life of David that so many of us love, of him advancing the king and being one of the greatest kings, he probably had 20 plus years of him working, serving, battling, fighting, being trained. But what was one of the main things that he did? Stay in God's will. Stay in being obedient as he possibly could. Of course, he was not perfect, but trying to do it God's way. And it said he was a man after God's own heart. And we learn in First Chronicles 29, verse 28, it says he died a good age. So looking at scripture, we can say he died at 70 years old, having enjoyed long life, wealth, and honor. His son Solomon succeeded him as king. So when you think about job advancement, when you think about success, it is really, really, really slow. It's one of those things where it's like, stay strong and trust in God's plan and be ready to work and be ready to serve and be ready to fight for the Lord and be ready to battle for the Lord and be ready to be trained, because you don't want to miss on those opportunities to be trained, because you like, yeah, that job is below me, or I can't do that, or I'm getting all this responsibility and I'm not getting the pay, or I'm not getting the acknowledgement. You're making an investment and planting some seeds that later will grow. And we look at with David, that took about 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 years possibly. Another person that I want to look at is a prominent figure in the Bible a lot of people love would be Moses. And look at Moses from a leadership standpoint. And one of the things that I was reminded with is great leadership, great leaders, they do a lot of following. And for Moses, it was like, who am I following? Oh, I'm going to follow God in the ways that he wants me to do things. And great leaders, they live for the unseen hours. In this era of social media and so many different things are recorded and it's posted and you got videos of everything. Why? The unseen hours when nobody else knows about it oftentimes make a man or a woman different. In the dark, working and grinding is how you really shine. And when I look at this from Acts chapter 7, verse 23, Moses was his first part of his life. He was raised in Egyptian royalty. Pharaoh's daughter took him in and raised him. And it says when Moses was 40 years old, he decided to visit his own people, the Israelites. And if you know about Moses' life, what happened? He went to go visit his people. He saw some stuff going on. He went and killed a man, and then he fled for his life. He probably thought when he was in that 40 range, like, you know what? I'm hot stuff. I'm the man. Like, I'm about to save my people. Like, look, watch me do this. But he did it outside of God's will by killing a man. And then he had to flee for his life. And I think about that is sometimes we get some of the best training and we become arrogant. We start thinking I don't need to do this God's way, or I can do this without God. And you see what happened with Moses is he ended up having to flee and do it a different way. Now, him spending this time, the next 40 years being a shepherd, being a foreigner in a different land, these are a lot of the years that some of us would say, like, this doesn't matter. Or, you know what, God can't use me anywhere more, or God's given up on me. And just look at this. It says, after 40 years had passed, an angel appeared to Moses in the flames of a burning bush in the desert near Mount Sinai. So probably when Moses thought he was done, and my life is just going to be a shepherd, and I'm just going to go ahead and stay in this land and be a foreigner, God was like, no, this is the time that I want to use you. Like, come on, Moses, this is the time. I know I said, hold on now this is the time. And so when you think about that, at 80 years old, he was going to start his greatest mission. And it wasn't under the flash of Pharaoh or Egyptian royalty. It was under the humility and the wisdom and the guidance of God's timing. So at 80 years old, that's a long time of preparing and waiting and being put in that position. That's when his time was on. That's when his time was. That's the time actually where culture wouldn't even say, hold on. Culture would say, you know what? You need to relax. You need to retire. You know what? Just go relax. But no, God was like, no, it's go time now. It's go time now. On this episode of Culture Says Hustle, God says, hold on. We have to look at one of the most famous couples in the Bible, Abraham and Sarah. And this is one that's especially key to look at, is because a lot of times in our lives, we're waiting for blessings, or we're waiting for things that have been promised to us, or we know like, okay, God is going to do something good in my life, and I trust in him and I believe him, you know, for the most part. But how long am I supposed to wait? Or can I help God out? Like, sometimes God just needs some help. That's what we think in our minds. And I think about them, they were in the process of waiting for a child. You might be waiting for job advancement, or you might be waiting for a certain relationship. I want to get married so bad. You know, we get into this mindset of like, I got to help God out. Like, you know what? Let me help God out because he's taking too long. And I've heard this phrase, God only helps those who help themselves. And it's like, that's not necessarily true. And what you mean? Like, what are you talking about in terms of you're going to help God out? And sometimes we just help, really, we helping ourselves by being still, by being still. God does not need our help. God will use that time to build a relationship with us. He will use that time to be like, hey, this is how you really trust me. This is how we really grow together. But so many times we try to help God out. God doesn't need our help. When we miss on that opportunity to develop a relationship, we miss on that opportunity to develop trust. We miss on that opportunity to grow and to really learn to be like, okay, I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop. Trust in God. So you think about Abraham and Sarah's life in Genesis chapter 12, at age 75, that's when God was like, Abram, I'm going to make you into a great nation. Trust it, believe it. I'm telling you, I'm going to make you into a great nation. He reminds him of that. Genesis chapter 15, verse 4. This is when he's 70s. He might be in his 70s or his 80s. God said this to Abram. Then the word of the Lord came to him. This man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir. He took him outside and said, look up at the sky and count the stars. If indeed you can count them, then he said, so shall your offspring be. You might be like, what's going on here? This was when Abram was like, God, you know you haven't given me a kid yet. You must mean that my servant is actually going to be my heir. Like, he's not really my son, and he's not really my flesh, but I'm going to give him everything, and you're going to build this nation through him. And God's like, no, I'm telling you, through your flesh, I am going to build a great nation. I'm going to make you into a great nation. Now, this is something else to just point out or just be aware of. Waiting with somebody else, that's really, really hard. Like, it's already hard when you waiting by yourself, but when you have to wait with someone else for a blessing or for something, it can become extremely hard. And we see this happens with Sarai and Abram in Genesis chapter 16, verse 2. Abram, knowing what God has already told him, still struggled, still went because it was a long time away. This is the NLT version. So Sarai said to Abram, the Lord has prevented me from having children. Go and sleep with my servant. Perhaps I can have children through her. And Abram agreed with Sarai's proposal. So Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, the Egyptian servant, and gave her to Abram as a wife. This happened 10 years after Abram had settled in the land of Canaan. Verse 4 says, so Abram had sexual relations with Hagar, and she became pregnant. But when Hagar knew she was pregnant, she began to treat her mistress, Sarai, with contempt. And this is one of those things where you can really get to start bending God's word and being like, well, technically, if Abram has sex with another woman and she was to give a child, that would be his flesh. And it was like, no, God told him he was talking about Sarai. And because he tried to help God out or bend what God was saying, which we all have done, I know I've definitely been guilty of this. What happened? His wife all of a sudden was treated with contempt. She ended up sending the mistress off. God had to go back and get her. That child, Ishmael, and the land or the nation that Abram's family was coming from had conflict for hundreds of years or for years. And it's just one of those things where it's like he tried to help God out. God doesn't need help. God just needs us to trust him when he says, hold on, hold on. And I think about myself with like, okay, I will plan things in my head, or I know I have planned or kind of thought things in my head. Like, you know what? By age 27, I want to be a head coach. I want to have my own program. Maybe by age 25, be married. Maybe by age 26, have a house. And when things don't go in the order or the time that we want, we start being like, you know what? Maybe I can cheat some steps and get maybe some blessings of marriage, if you know what I mean. Or, you know what? Maybe I can get this. And then when we're always worried about the next thing, we miss out on the opportunities and the blessings that God has in the wait. There are things that God can only show us, or God will only show us when we are waiting on that other blessing that's going to come. So just something for you to think about, give you some encouragement. You might not be where you want to be right now. The relationship might not be where you want it to be, but there's some blessings in the season that you are in that you couldn't get even in that season that you think is going to be so much better or is going to be the highlight of your life or your career. Think about the now. Be present. Be present. Genesis chapter 18, verse 10 says this. Then the Lord said, I will be sure to return to you at this time next year, and your wife Sarah will have a son. Genesis 21, verse 5. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. That's the promised son. So Sarah had to be like 90 or 91 years old. Genesis 17, verse 17 tells us that that's her age, around that 90 or 91. And then he died at age 175. Genesis 25, verse 7 tells us. So you think about that. Having a kid at 100 years old, he had to wait over half his life. He had to wait over half his life for that blessing, for that thing. He was like, man, I want so bad. And I just want you to think about wait, because culture is going to tell you, help God out, hustle this way, do that. God says, hold on, get out the way, trust and pray, be obedient. The last person that I want to look at that I know people love, the account of Joseph. We love that story of rags to riches. Joseph went from slave to second in command. And we think about that because sometimes like we read a chapter and we're like, oh, in the chapter no, that was 13 years of his life. Genesis chapter 41, verse 46 says this. It says, Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went from Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout Egypt. At age 17, Joseph was sold into slavery. So let's say like 10 years, maybe he was working and getting his way into Potiphar's house. Remember, he worked his way up. He ended up running like this bodyguard or secret service agent or somebody who was big time with the Pharaoh. He ended up running his whole entire house and he worked his way up. But then he gets falsely accused of rape. And then he spends a few years in prison. So just think about that. Age 17, sold into slavery. Age 30, second in command in the greatest country at that time. We look at that and say, oh, it happened overnight. That is 13 years. 13 years. And coming from one of the worst situations of being a slave to working your way up, then getting falsely accused of rape. Then while you are in prison, a lot of us would have been bitter. Like, yeah, I'm not talking to anybody else. Hustling. I'm done hustling. Look where hustling got me. I'm going to hustle my way out of here. I'm not helping anybody. Eye for eye. Somebody say something crazy. I'm saying something crazy to them. But he still used his gifts and his talents that God had blessed him with to show love to others. And he told two people their dreams in prison. One of them, he's like, you're going to lose your life. One of you, you're going to get your position restored back to you. And this is kind of where we lead off right now. Genesis chapter 41, verse 12. Now a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams and he interpreted them for us, giving each man the interpretation of his dream. And things turned out exactly as he interpreted them to us. I was restored to my position and the other man was impaled. So Pharaoh sent for Joseph and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. Now, a lot of people will look at this and say, man, that was 13 years of dealing with some mess. And what we can learn from Joseph is wherever he was at, whatever position he was in, he made the most of it. And he looked at the blessings and the opportunities that God gave him. Even when he was a slave, making the most of his opportunities. Even when he was in Pharaoh's household, making the most of his opportunities. Even when he was in prison, making the most of his opportunities. So whenever Joseph was in his weight, he still was like, how can I glorify God? What blessings, what opportunities, what training opportunities do you have for me in this weight? And that's something beautiful for us to take to heart as Christians and as followers of God, because we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. He was never like, woe me, poor me. No, God, no. No, he just was like, all right, this is what I got. I got dealt lemons. I'm going to make some great lemonade. You better believe. You better believe. And for us as Christians and for us as followers, we also can have that Hebrews 12 verse 11 mentality, understanding that no discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. We can be trained. And at the time, some stuff will truly seem painful in our life, but we can know like God is working for the good of us for sure, without a doubt, hands down. We know that. And when I think about Jesus and him communicating this with his disciples, there were so many things that the disciples did not understand and did not get. But what did Jesus tell them? Jesus said, you know what? Trust me. Follow me. Believe what I am saying. I'm telling you, this is going to be best for us, best for you. And as believers, we can take this to heart. John chapter 13, Jesus told them, starting at verse 7, he says, you do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand. And right now, what we can understand is that our God loves us so much. Jesus has proved that he's good for it. We can cash that check like he's good for it. He's died. He's paid our debt. He's redeemed us. This is how we find true purpose. This is how we find true peace, by doing it his way and allowing his love to motivate us in each and everything we do. Because culture is going to tell us to hustle and try to get this fool's gold or get this fake love. But God is saying, hold on, because he wants to prove to us the love that he has for us. He wants to develop us. He wants to train us. He wants to put us in a position to be the best we possibly can, to glorify him and advance his kingdom. And this is the Non-Microwave Truth. Thanks for joining me on this episode of Culture Says Hustle. God says, hold on. Be patient in your wait. Trust in him. Peace, punch, Captain Crunch. Say no to drugs and yes to Jesus. I am out.